Josh Barnett, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, good to be here.
It's great to have you, man. Can you briefly, for the people who may not be familiar with you, give us an introduction to who you are and what you do?
My name is Josh Barnett. I go by the War Master because I am a professional fighter in the world of MMA and professional wrestler. I've been doing mixed martial arts since I was 19 years old for a career of 26 years or so now. And then I've been pro wrestling since 2002, taken under the tutelage of Antonio Inoki and New Japan Pro Wrestling. And with a lot of my roots in MMA actually coming from the pro wrestling side of things, uh, more specifically the catch wrestling lineage of Wigan, England, the Lancashire area, as well as how that was then imported to Japan, which would become shoot wrestling, and essentially the premise for most all of modern mixed martial arts.
Mm.
And I carry that alive on both ends, as well as being a person who gets involved in whiskey distilling, metal music, muscle cars, firearms, you name it.
Okay, really quickly, I'm super sorry to interrupt this episode of the podcast with Josh Barnett. I just want to ask you really quickly if you're enjoying it so far. By the way, this is a really good one. Please hit that subscribe button. It is effortless for you. It makes a huge difference for the podcast. It is risk-free. It's also just literally free. If you don't like being subscribed to the podcast, if you don't like what we put out, you could always unsubscribe later. But I have a feeling you might like what we got coming up the next couple of months. So thank you so much for that. Enjoy the rest of the episode. Cool. The term catch wrestling, what does that cover exactly?
Well, it's the easiest way to think about catch wrestling is if you ever watched American folk style or collegiate style wrestling, that's essentially catch as catch can, but without the submissions in it. Catch wrestling or catch as catch can was a style of wrestling born from the coal miners in the Lancashire region of Wigan, England. And it meant get a hold any way you could get one. And so you could win by pin or by submission. And over time, this graduated to become a fairly popular and known style for competitors in what was old time pro wrestling, which were legitimate bouts. It was, in fact, things like old time professional wrestling, like you might find in the carnivals, is why Mitsuo Maeda, the judoka and jujitsuka, ended up in Brazil at a carnival ran by one of the Gracie patriarchs. And he was there as Count Koma doing professional wrestling. And he wanted to stay. And from that, the Gracie patriarch had him teach his sons jujitsu and judo, and as well catch wrestling, because it was, if you're going to teach grappling, you're going to teach all you know. And from there, the Gracies developed into jiu-jitsu powerhouses, and jiu-jitsu was anchored into Brazil.
Interesting. I find it super fascinating to hear people's stories on whether or not they remember a very specific point in their life when they got either introduced or knew that or fell in love with their specific art or sport. You said you were 19 when you started MMA?
Yeah, but I saw UFC 2 as a sophomore in high school. And for someone who was enthralled with all the martial arts films of the 80s growing up, fighting in general, it was always something that I guess I just always had a natural curiosity and interest in it. And my dad used to watch boxing on television all the time as well. Um, but it was those martial arts films like Bloodsport and the fighting arcade games, not even just simply Street Fighter and the like, and Mortal Kombat, but also the scrolling beat 'em ups like Fatal or what is it, a Final Fight and Streets of Rage and things like that. So you've got martial arts and
Mm.
combat kind of around you at all times, and it was a big well, it still is, but I mean, it was a really big genre of cinema in the 70s and 80s, especially with kung fu films. And then you would eventually find the karate films from Japan with Shinichi Chiba and others like it. and then you got your homegrown American stuff like Bloodsport, right? So with that, the heyday of professional wrestling for the WWF and its pretty large and national rise, surrounded by all this cool stuff of people that are larger than life, and the heroic ideal out there, basically reliving, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey over and over and over and over again in one way or another. And eventually you see the Ultimate Fighting Championships arrives, and you go, wait a second, now we could see what every style claims to be so deadly and competent and capable. We can actually put them in the ring and see them go at it. That is the thing we've been waiting for practically our whole lives. And it really shook out really quickly as to what was good and what wasn't. And I was blown away. I thought that was the thing that I had always wanted to do, the coolest thing that you could possibly do, the most competitive, the highest level of competitive environment that one could compete in over any other sporting environment, bar none, by far. And I still do. And I had never been drawn to anything more than that. And so as a sophomore in high school, watching this on a VHS tape, I just said to myself, I have no idea how one would even approach this, get involved. How do you get in the mix of any of this stuff? But I'll find a way and I'll do it. And I did. I didn't have any blueprint as to what you would do. I try to tell modern athletes in mixed martial arts today that, I mean, look, you guys have essentially like a generic rule set you all work off of. You all have a generic, generally typical type of glove and all these things. Like when I started fighting, we didn't have gloves. Sometimes you could wear them as an option if you wanted to, but it just wasn't part of the equation. The rules were always somewhat different and usually, open-ended, right? So especially when it came to things like time, we didn't necessarily have rounds. You just went maybe 1 hour, 30 minutes,
Yeah.
if it even, but they ever lasted that long, but it was possible. And your basic training gear and equipment and fight shorts, none of that existed. So we had to make do with whatever we had. And when it came to things like gloves, we would use these Harbinger bag gloves, and we would cut the bar out of the palm and alter them so you would have MMA gloves. And over time, obviously, now we have structures in place where you can go to your local schools and they have an MMA program and maybe even local fight promotions that you can compete in that are on the regular, and grappling competitions. And there is a pretty clear-cut path depending on what you want to do, be it from just doing jiu-jitsu or even with catch wrestling. The Snake Pit in Wigan throws a tournament every year they call a world championship, which is great because at least it's out there for someone to aspire to. You can go online and register for it and show up and wrestle, and there's going to be a mat and there's going to be an audience. All these things just make they make it so that someone can take a look and go, okay, well, I got you. Here's where I go to buy the equipment. And then here's the gym, I can go to, and here's the different options available to me. But I really enjoy that because it promotes and keeps the sport growing and alive. But also at the same time, I think it loses that sense of adventure. That's the same thing that made men want to get on ships and travel around the world.
Right.
Or and discover what they could, or go to war, or become pirates, or you name it, right? Like the walls to your great cities and your earliest civilizations didn't start because somebody just left a bunch of stuff laying around and said, hey, if you feel like building one of these, we got some over here, like go ahead, knock yourself out, see what you could do. No, you had to go out there and you had to be a pioneer and you had to forge your own destiny, and often in those cases the destiny of your people, by daring and taking that step towards that kind of adventure into the unknown. And nothing was guaranteed. More than likely you were going to fail, but I can say that I didn't have such risks involved when I decided to step forward into the realm of mixed martial arts. And I've definitely failed plenty, but I've managed to succeed more than I've failed. And so far, it's been a great journey, and it's brought so much to my life that is even external from MMA and pro wrestling that there's no way I could even consider trading it for anything else.
Hmm. You said there weren't that many risks when you first started out?
Not, no, I'm just saying in comparison to say being, some tribe somewhere
Ah.
trying to find a place to, maybe not have to be so nomadic, or it would have better, fresher sources of running water and game, and or maybe more arid land, or more nutritious land to raise crops and so on and so forth. I mean, yeah, who knows what you're going to run into out there.
Right.
It wasn't life or death for me. It was just a matter of like, okay, yeah, there is no set pattern. There's no rule book on how you go about this. There's no become an MMA fighter for dummies. I'll just be the dummy myself.
Right. So how did you approach it? Did you go, okay, I need to learn a lot of different types of martial arts here in the beginning, or did you focus on one specific one, get good at that, and then focus on another one?
I already had a background as a amateur wrestler. I
Okay.
wrestled in high school, and I did freestyle Greco in the summertime, which is how we divide wrestling, amateur wrestling up here in the States. So you'll have your scholastic wrestling, which will all be folk style and could lead into wrestling in university or college. But in the summer times, you'll have organizations like USA Wrestling or the AAU, where you could compete in freestyle or Greco-Roman. And then that's where we will do all of our trials and things to determine our world team members and people that we'll send out to go wrestle the Danes or the Swedes or the Iranis or whoever. Oh, you're froze.
Oh,
Crap.
am I back? You didn't freeze for me.
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so that, and then from that, that's the international style of wrestling is going to be freestyle or Greco, and we have that as something that we do as an extra curricular outside of school. So I was competing in that. I had some judo under my belt from my, like, one of the most important men to get me on the martial arts journey, an old football coach who was a very high level judoka who started the Seattle Judo Dojo, I believe, way back when, and was one of the, I guess you could call it the Gang of Four. That was Bruce Lee, Fred Sato, Taki Kimura, and Bruce Lee's first student, Jesse Glover, out in Seattle, where I'm from. So he got me going in martial arts and started me off on judo. And I never really became like a full born and bred judoka, but it got me on the mats and it got me learning new stuff and adding the concept of submission into my repertoire. And from there, it was watching these fights and seeing how people's approaches and philosophies towards winning changes over time, and noticing guys like, okay, well, Hoist Gracie and let's just say Hoist Gracie, Oleg Taktarov, and Dan Severn all seem to really concentrate on a singular mastery for the most part. And they were able to find quite a lot of success with it. But you would see where some of those skill sets could bump up against others. And given certain context, one will win out over the other due to the deficit. Let's say, like with Dan Severn, he could take and control Hoist, but eventually he got caught in a triangle choke because he just really wasn't familiar enough with that submission game there to be able to defend it well. Well, and then you had guys like Ken Shamrock and Marco Huas, who are more well-rounded, who could strike as well as grapple, even though they might prefer, like with Marco, he liked to chop at the legs and play kind of a what would you call it? Like, Marco wasn't overly aggressive on the feet. He was more measured, but he liked to use a striking game plan. But it seemed to me in some ways that maybe in fact his grappling game on top was maybe one of his strongest points. But either way, they had what you would call this prototypical, more well-rounded style. Then you start seeing Pancras with people like Funaki and others. They're developing a more well-rounded style. Of course, you still have Rickson Gracie, who really just kind of laid his bread and butter on being a really great jiu-jitsu wrestler, as well as just a great athlete. And from this, I thought, well, I know wrestling is my strength, but if I can't employ my wrestling, I need to be able to strike. And if somebody's really good at wrestling.
Oh, you froze, Josh. Can you hear me, Josh?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Good.
Yeah. So if I keep them away from their strength, it would be to my benefit. Another person to show this example was Don Fry when he fought Amari Batesh. Amari Batesh was this really decorated jiu-jitsu guy, and the really high-level jiu-jitsu guys were always just hell on wheels, and getting a win over one was pretty rare. And out comes Don Fry, who was a wrestler, judo player, boxer, but mostly a wrestler. And he gets in there and he just shuts down all the takedowns and socks him up into a finish. And you're like, okay, yeah, I can see how this is all starting to play out. So I just figured I need to be well-rounded. I need to be able to not just be able to win in one area, but win in all areas. And when my first real coach, Jim Harrison, he was a incredibly well-rounded athlete himself with his background in judo and karate and kickboxing. And when I transitioned to the first professional fight gym I ever trained at, AMC Pancration under Matt Hume and Harushi Manishi, the thought process was the same, like be a complete fighter.
Right. If you could only pick one martial arts, I know you probably hate this question, which would be the best out of all of them?
I'm going to say the shorthand of it will be wrestling, but I would say catch wrestling, because catch has the submission aspect as part of its incentives. But wrestling, in fact, I don't even have to pick it, because regardless of my bias, when you look at the foundations of the most UFC champions, it's wrestling. I mean, it is amateur, folk style, freestyle, Greco wrestling. It is wrestling that is number one. More wrestlers have been successful in MMA than anything else. And even then, when you look at what you would call jiu-jitsu fighters these days, I think a lot of that is highly influenced by what would become the Karl Gracie team, and which was a very usually more of a top game team, but of course against the really high level wrestlers, they'd end up having to fight off their backs. But even still, over time, that Carlson Gracie team, they metamorphosized into Brazilian top team, and they're bringing in American wrestlers to teach them wrestling. All these guys are hitting takedowns and throws and getting on top, and they're increasing all their striking skills, and they're becoming well-rounded themselves. So even in that sense, I think you can make an argument that the addition of wrestling to the jiu-jitsu guys, the more pure Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialists, has actually been the thing to make them competitive. So I still think, wrestling to me is number one.
When you hear about wrestlers, I feel like it's the combat sport where people are the most extreme in terms of discipline and the training style. You hear a lot of wrestlers dehydrate themselves much more than other combat sports, I feel like.
It's true. And if there's the one knock against combat sports, and that includes wrestling, but especially MMA that I have, it's, we should honestly end weight cutting. I mean, there's way too many, if somebody wants to go and derive all their judgments off of data and studies, it is without a question that all of the science backs up the fact that severely dehydrating your body and depleting your body of water is not only an incredible stressor on every function in your body, including your hormone production, your internal organs, everything. It reduces the amount of water in your muscles, and reduces the amount of water in your tendons and ligaments and cartilage. Everything that would have water, you're trying to draw it out, and you don't get to choose like, hey, only draw water from fat stores, which if you're a lighter weight or a really lean fighter, like, well, you don't even have that much to draw from in the first place. So that means it's going to have to pull it out of wherever it can come from, and that's just the nature. Also, I mean, if you take chemistry and physics, you'll also understand that water is just going to transfer from one place to another, especially when it comes to wherever the highest levels of waters are, or if the difference of salinity. All these things are going to move water from one place to the other. Um, and part of that is how we use those factors in cutting weight. Not to mention doing things like tricking our body by overhydrating. So your body goes, I need to get rid of all this excess
Mm.
water. And when it starts trying to flush the excess water, and then you add the aspect of osmosis, or putting yourself in a higher level of salinity, and these different things, and heat to get your own cooling system going, to release sweat to help cool yourself off. I mean, you're doing all these things, tricking your body, and then taking it into overdrive on top of it while you're already getting it going. And even doing things like covering yourself in different types of oils to like close off your pores to make you sweat more. And it's insane. And while I'll say that we've gotten really good at doing this incredibly destructive endeavor to our bodies, I think that at the end of the day, it has increased the amount of injuries, orders of magnitude, especially when it comes to uh, trauma and the brain, because there's also water and fluids in your skull, not just in the brain itself, but in and around it, that is not just there to keep the brain in a nice cozy space where it's got the nutrients it needs and can to send whatever chemicals it needs to send out, and to float and stay at a consistent healthy temperature. It also reduces impact
Ah.
as it moves around. And so if you really deplete your body, the rehydration process can go a long way towards replenishing things, but it can't do it completely. And so I think things like, ACL tears in your shoulders and rotator cuffs and things like that, and especially the reduction of fluid in the brain, and that what happens when you're taking these blows and that brain is getting bounced around inside that skull. It's I think it is the biggest factor towards that kind of injury, like CTE, or even just simply like some of the ligament tears and things that you'll see. And that's not even splitting this between what the effects of these things are on male athletes versus female athletes. I know society's getting really weird nowadays, how it views biology, but um, again, if people really want to say that they're very scientifically minded, and they have an actual belief in the use of the scientific model, well, then it is. If you think it's bad on men, it's even worse on women as to what it does to them.
How so?
So, well, because the hormone structure and balance of women is while we have the same hormones, it's just the levels of them are very different, and the depletion from weight cutting can cause the interruption and of their natural cycles for
Mm.
pregnancy, as well as women have more tendency for ACL tears due to their hip to knee ratio and angle. So you've got increased strain there, and now if you're depleting all this water, it's going to increase the potential for that ACL tear more so than it would in a man. Even though a man is also going to be subject to more risk with an ACL tear or any kind of ligament tear. But you'll see this happen in female sports quite a bit. Female MMA fighters. I knew one that has torn both her ACLs at one point. There was an up and coming female featherweight, I believe, in the UFC, and now she's healed, and you say healed, once you've torn your ACL. I mean, it's never the same,
Mm.
but she's back to competing. But when she originally got hurt on her rise up, ACL tear, and it's not even, people love to always get into differences are always a matter of better or worse. And it's like, it's not necessarily about that. If some things contextually maybe better, maybe worse. I mean, it really depends. But at the end of the day, you got to deal with the way things are. And
Mm,
that starts with the individual and how you're built and how your body works, and the length of your own bones and musculature versus somebody else's, and everything that comes with that, and then also the generalities on top of it. So it's just that weight cutting can put women into some really nasty areas with like things like what's called FATS, or FATS, which is female athlete triad syndrome, which has to do with uh, it's like the easiest way to put it, I guess, is it's like this really heavy stressor on the body from excessive dieting and weight loss, and can really completely screw up their hormone cycles. And you'll see female athletes lose their periods, which that can happen just from being really lean. But if they are suffering from something like fats, and I had this happen with an athlete where I set out a diet, a whole program for them, a lifting program, a diet program, and everything. It was for body composition. They didn't necessarily need to lose anyway. But if they were to stick to this program, it was to help them with their strength goals, develop more lean mass while reducing their body fat potentially, but that wasn't really the point, and we weren't really looking for specific weight management. It was just towards athletic potential. And be they although it's more common in female athletes, they often undereat. It happens both ways, especially when you have to make weight classes,
mm.
and being always having that in the back of your head that I don't want to get so far out of the range of weight class. And if I do, the worry about being able to bring it back in. And you have to have a lot of trust and a lot of confidence at the end of the day, not just in yourself, but also in your coaching, uh, your coaches and coaching staff to deliver. If they say, hey, yeah, you're going to go up to X amount of weight, but then when we alter your diet a little bit, and then your training load goes up, your weight will come down and it'll be fine. But anyways, I had this female athlete, and she was great. She was making her weight class every time. She was good and fit, and just we're working on getting stronger and being more as best of an athlete as we could. And I'm watching them over time and go, okay, well, if they're doing the lifts and the training like they're supposed to, and they say they are, then I should be seeing a difference even physically. I should be able to notice it. And number two, if they're eating the way they're supposed to, I should. So, but I'm not seeing this. In fact, they're kind of staying the same. And eventually, I had to force them to give me a diet, or a journal, a diet journal. And when I got 1 week worth of what they were doing, they were hitting all their training sessions with me, and they were doing all their training sessions outside of this for the strength and conditioning stuff. But their eating was half of what they were supposed to. And they did this long enough that when we tried to readjust things back to how they were, we weren't getting any results.
Whoa.
And eventually I had to look into more literature and go, oh, okay, this is what we're dealing with. Her cycle's all screwed up, all screwed up. And I'm like, well, okay, that's strange. And then I'm looking into other aspects of what kind of lethargy and fatigue she's getting, and whether or not how she's feeling in these workouts. And eventually, it's like, okay, yeah, she's got female athlete triad syndrome, and now it's going to take us months to get her body to stop freaking out and thinking that it's possibly going to starve to death or whatever, right? And over time, it managed to correct itself. But if you're an athlete and your time is already limited to where you can be an athlete and go out and compete at your best, and now you've been working towards something, let's say, you've been competing, maybe you've been winning your fights or your bouts, and now you're trying to advance to the next order of where your competition is, and now you're sidelined because all of your natural hormone levels are all over the place. Your body is freaking out. Okay, well, now you ain't going to make weight because that, even if you could, that's only going to make it worse. And number two, your body has to have time now to recover. And
Mm.
this recovery is not going to be like recovering from sore muscles. This is getting all of your um, all of your glandular and all these other systems to work right again. So,
How does that
you
happen?
know,
What is the process of that?
well, supplementation and it can be used to help target that, but the main thing is you gotta reduce the intensity of all the training. You got to make sure that they're eating well enough and that their body is getting enough nutrients so that it gives itself some time to reset. But you don't know how long it's going to take exactly, and every case can be different. Every case of it can have more or less intensity.
Hmm. So what
But
is
these are
the
just things you would never know. You would never think about that, right?
yeah.
But men can easily screw themselves up with overtraining. I don't mean overtraining the more typical sense, but I mean, let's say overtraining and undereating.
Mm.
You can do a lot of damage to yourself that way, but it's just different for females. And they have, their hormonal cycles every month they have to consider as well. And, it's not about saying it's better or worse. I mean, you can say like, oh, well, if I'm trying to be this, I don't know, combat athlete and make weight and do all this stuff. And so that's harder for me to do that. And it's like, yeah, but you can also make babies and I can't.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I don't know. Yeah, it seems pretty cool on your end. It seems like you kind of got a big checkmate there. So,
Do you worry about people um you know, cancel culture and you have to be careful about what you say nowadays because of
oh, yeah. I think it's not even just about that you have to be careful about what you say because society is one way. I honestly think that a good chunk of society itself isn't really that interested in these sort of things. However, there are enough people, even if it be a minority, that they create all their sense of meaningfulness and purpose in life. Like their entire ethical structure is built around creating boogeymen and slaying them in ways that they think is, I mean, it's like but the only thing that allows them to even have any kind of a lever of power is that there are others like themselves, and a lot of them are embedded into corporate culture. So these corporations will then turn away from you, or journalism, especially what passes for journalism. So they use these kind of what would you this Ouroboros that just keeps eating its own tail
mm.
to distill this cycle of fear to effectively paint people as untouchable, or put the what was it, the red letter, the scarlet letter on them, and to make them, you got to stay away for things that are the most tepid, right? Where, and usually over time you'll see like, oh yeah, activists busted for, having child porn on their computer,
Mm.
or, for rape or something. It's just like, well, your morality isn't based upon how many people you have said are problematic online and how many hashtag um, movements you've tweeted about. That really isn't about your. That's that's performative, right? It's the people that do charity, but only when the camera's on,
Mm.
right? I've got plenty of instances in my life where I've stuck my neck out for other people, those that I don't know and will never see again. But I don't have to tweet about it or post about it or write a book about how, look at me, how virtuous I am. At the end of the
Mm.
day, I remember as a young age, the people that banged on about their religiosity were always the ones that I felt were like the most false or came off as the most false. Whereas the people that just imbued and exuded those, whatever that sentiment was, I they came on. They always seemed like, well, that's the real deal right there. Like
Mm,
if a thing really is what it says it is, what it purports itself to be, it will be that authentically through in and throughout. It will not have to advertise it. It will not have to tell you because it will be apparent.
right. I think definitely it is the minority of people that point fingers, trying to cancel people, but their voices are so loud because they're the people
Mm-hmm.
commenting on YouTube videos. They're the
Mm-hmm.
people retweeting all the hate. The people who
Yeah.
don't care about all this shit, they don't comment on YouTube videos. They just,
Yes,
just leave us alone.
that's true. And not only are they the loudest, but they're part of the reason why they're the loudest because their fingers on the button nonstop. You need to understand that when a person sees, there's a few things. There's like there was a quote by C.S. Lewis about he doesn't really worry about the thief or the robber because you know what they're going to do, or was it the tyrant, something like that? Like he's going to do something because he's evil, right, or because he has ill intent, but the person that believes that whose actions are they believe rooted in good will is the most dangerous, because if that person, let's say, believes that they're on a moral crusade and that means in fact that mistakenly so, they will never stop and they will never
Mm,
quit, because to them there is they're on the right side of history, let's go to say. And so therefore there is no limit to where they'll go, no limit to what they'll do, and no interest in ever stopping. And I'd also like to add to that sentiment that people like that, it becomes their locus of being in the world. And they, regardless of whether or not they are religious in any typical fashion, they are religious people. They treat their social media crusades as just as such as when um, the Templars and everyone marched into Jerusalem. Like it is the same for them. It's the same for when the Ottoman Empire moved across the Middle East and into Eastern Europe. There is no difference. They are just as zealously religious as anyone else.
mm. Do you think this will ever change? Because, historically, this might not have happened on the internet, but these are the same people that joined the mob to burn witches on the
Mm-hmm.
fire. Do you think this will always
No,
happen?
this will never change because but the thing is, I think what we're seeing is we're seeing humanity, as it always has been, exacerbated by technology, right? Without technology, the ability for us to even have these conversations, be they good or bad, wouldn't exist. The reach of being able to contact me in the first place for us to sit here wouldn't be there, but also that reach into other people's lives in a way that cannot actually be vetted in a personal sense, let's say with Instagram or any kind of social media, didn't exist. So now you have all these natural processes in the way humans think, feel, empathize, sympathize, and so on and so forth. Now you have essentially these simulacra of real people and real lives pounding at the doorsteps of your being every single day, and your body doesn't necessarily know how to differentiate between that which is real and that which is not, especially when social media in all sense and purposes appears in it to be real, to
Yeah.
be a real person, telling you about their life in language that you comprehend, in grammar, forms, and function that you comprehend. So when in any case was humanity ready for something like that? It isn't. And Heidegger talks about this a lot with the way he approaches technology, and so does Oswald Spengler.
Have have people tried to cancel you? I mean, I'm sure
I
some
don't
people
know.
have, but has
I,
there
I
been?
know that there are people out there that I'm I have no doubt dislike me or absolutely a whole, like, to their core believe in a, I don't know, like a counter essence to the way I see the world. Like I got in, like someone once threw a fit because I just simply made the point of like, okay, you're banging on about rights all the time. Well, what are rights? Rights are what you can defend at the end of the day, because they're made up. Rights are made up. They are not. I don't care if someone puts them on a piece of paper, or some governing body declares them all to be so. I mean, at the end of the day, if there isn't some way to enforce those rights, then what are they? And who determines that? That's not to say, and that wasn't making an argument for or against them. I'm just stating the abstract concepts of what you're dealing with. But because people never think of such things from that position of any abstract, or that it is abstract, they lose their shit. They just feel
Mm.
like it's just automatically you're thinking no one should have any rights. It's all might is right. I mean, it's like it wasn't there was no value judgment given upon it. It's the same with the way people love to scream about capitalism all the time. And I'm like, well, define it. And they say it's, you know, they always declare it's a system, they're exploiting this, or it is this blah. It's always got all these additionals added to it. And I'm like, no, you're wrong. Capitalism is simply the ability to own private property, the right to your own labor, and I guess we would say ideas, trademarks, and copyright. So the right to your own ideas, your own materials, your own goods, your own labor, and the free ability to sell it to and whom, however you wish. And then, of course, everyone, because there's no negative or positive modifier to that, right? There is nothing outside of that. That's just a very objective, neutral thing. They just get mad because they want to see it from one way or the other, right? But I think that is also, if you even really want to make a critique of capitalism, it's simply you just need to take the critique to its deepest level, and that is humans, right? So there is no restraint on what it is you produce necessarily inherently in a free market system, which is a base capitalist free market system, laissez-faire, let's say. There is no restriction on what that could or couldn't be. There is no restriction on how you may act within that system. So essentially, you're saying this is the problem of human freedom, right? So you can give people the ultimate amount of freedom, let's say, and watch what they do, right? And if you go, well, someone might do this thing, yeah, well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. What are you going to do about it if they've got ultimate freedom to do anything, anyhow they will? Well, they can't be. And then, of course, all the restrictions start coming in, and you're like,
Mm.
of course they do, because you get it and I get it, and everybody who's ever been born understands it, right? Because we know, if we know one thing, we know ourselves, and we know what is worst about us and what is best about us. Um, and so if that's out there in the world, and if there is no restraint to the worst of us, we know how bad of a monster that could be. And everybody wishes that they had like a unique and specific, totalizing solution for everything always. But I think the reality is that everything has a level of flux, and there has to be some kind of adjustment here and there, not just for the sentiments and the people and scale. That's another thing I think that people really forget about. It's one thing to create I don't know, like an anarcho-communist commune with 500 people, and do it with 5,000. Now do it with 50,000, 5 million. I mean, it's just like, I don't think that there's definitely no utopia. And I don't think that everything always works exactly as it was planned on paper, especially when scale and the people, the people question comes into play, because no one person is the same as the other, and every group could have its own feelings and sentiments, and then add technology on top of that. So whatever you do now, think about something that could, it's like, it's one thing to be able to light a match, or maybe even grab a little bit of tinder to start off of some coals, some hot coals. It's another thing to have now balloons full of gasoline, right? So both will help you increase the amount of fire you have, but in varying degrees and at varying speeds.
Right. How does things change with scale? I believe I listened to you talk to Lex Friedman about, back in the hunter-gatherer societies where we were not that many people, people were more valuable because there weren't that many of us in the tribes. And now that
Mm-hmm.
we see thousands of people every single day, either in real life or on our phone. Feels like people become less valuable.
It's true. And I think that, in one of the very few things that you could say that Marx did correctly pinpoint. And so, but he would talk about, excess capital and excess surplus capital and surplus goods, right? Building things in excess and creating excess. And with that excess comes waste. And then you could argue about, what waste is in terms of capital and goods and services. But honest, and he was such a surly, cantankerous, like sounds like such a dreadful, awful person in real life. But yeah, go look up the actual, like, the biography, the history of Marx as a person. He is awful. But
Really?
yeah, he's really awful. He was not only was he like covered in, he had like horrible boils he would get and the worst attitude ever, but he basically like uh so he's got this whole system of distribution and collective ownership and all these kind of things, which when you read about him, it makes sense because he married into a family that he was constantly leveraging their money for himself. Then when they stopped giving him any more loans, then he would pawn the family's goods all the time to get more money. Then he hooked up with this dude Engels, who's also kind of comes off as like he would be the kind of person that's all about polycules. I mean, this dude was all about trying to have like the most twisted up way of sexual and familial intermingling. and and this guy, it comes from, now he's all about doing all this collectivization and so on, and destruction of the capitalist system and so on and so forth. He is rich as shit. Like, Marx didn't come from poverty either, but Engels, he's the son of a massively rich industrialist.
Hmm.
And neither one of them had ever stepped foot in an actual factory in their entire lives, never have done a single bit of work in a factory or for a factory. And, they're basically just university, academic priests of a sort after they get out of the end of it. And they theorize and talk about everything. Not to say that they're always utterly incorrect on everything they see or all their observations, although I would say there's a lot of planting a seed of truth and sprouting a forest of bullshit. But then you start to see where their own personal, like the way that they build their lives and operate in their lives. So Engels comes around. Now Engels is footing the bill for all of Marx's stuff. And then Marx has articles that would be printed in this newspaper. I forget if it was New York Times or whoever it was back in the day. But Engels is writing them all for him. It's just
Wow.
like, so, the guy was a dude who wanted a system to take care of him,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, I would say Marx is a personality type. He was a person that felt like he was better than everyone else and he deserved to be treated better. And if only these stupid, peons understood that, then they would rightly keep him in the manner of living of which he so deserves. He's a very much what I would call a person really hell bent on deserve.
Hmm.
And deserve often becomes a really poisonous concept. But, outside of all that, one of the things to understand was he is right about you can become it, industrialization can create dehumanization by separating the man from the work himself. And this is true, but I don't know that he ever looked into the fact that not only does industrialization increase the ability to increase populations and sustain these populations, but now you start creating an excess of human capital. And what are these people going to do? And you get to this point in modern age where AI and robotics become an issue. And
Mm.
if AI and robotics can do a thing, and this is again where, people throw a fit about capitalism, but it's like, but capitalism doesn't hold a gun to anyone's head to say, uh, put in a kiosk and remove 10 workers out of every store and save money and increase profit. They say it's all capitalism's fault, but it's not. And if you even want to say it's a structural fault of any environment you're in, it's not capitalism. It is everybody in every system that is, and every act, even on the ones that you voted on or that your representative that you put into power voted on, and everything that they put to play and how it interacts with it, everything else as a whole. These societies are gestalt entities, and you cannot divide them from themselves. You have to and consider everything that led to the next thing and everything that is stressing the other. And you don't always know what that's going to be. And everybody thinks, oh, it is this one thing. Boom, I'll just pull that out. Did it change? Yeah. Did it change for the better? No. Did it change for the better? I don't know, but it's different. Well, then I guess we'll have to wait and see. Right. It's just, if it was so simple that all of our societal issues, from the smaller municipal to state or national or international level, which that's even a whole nother argument as to like how much how much how much power should national or, let's say, separate entities have on an international, which is the multiple entities across the world, right? How much should they be able to affect the other, and why? Totally different argument, not what I'm getting into right now. But thinking, if it could always be solved so simply, well, wouldn't they? I mean, I'm of the belief that most of our systems, while it's pretty impressive that we be able to create systems that can operate as they do, running water, electricity, the food logistics. I mean, even when they're shittier versions of it than, let's say, the Danish, I'm sure the Danes have a great one. Well, like most of Western society, but even in the places where it's not as efficient, it's still pretty fucking amazing, right?
Mm.
Giving the
Yeah.
course of all human existence and what is being done by moving grain from one end of the world to another in such a fashion. That's incredible. But if everything could be changed so easily, then these managerial rent-seeking types would be able to do it. But the thing is, the more I see of the way these bureaucratic systems are constructed, while they have their strengths, they also have their weaknesses, and they just seem to create and propagate more and more and more managerial bureaucrats, like James Burnham was writing about way back when. And these people no longer have any understanding or capability to create, fix, or actually affect any real change. All they know how to do is manage. And honestly, I believe that most of them are, as the term goes, rent seekers. They're not there to actually do anything. They're just there to keep the thing moving and collect rent while in office.
Mm. Josh,
But
thank you
but
so.
you know
Yeah.
what? I will
Yeah.
give them one little caveat to that, and
Yes.
that is this. Why should we expect these people to do any better than that when, one, they've never been incentivized to do anything more than, and even when they are there, they're given such rah-rahs and pat on the backs as if they're really amazing people when they haven't done a fucking thing. And number two, why also would we expect them to necessarily even be able to do that? Because I think we're really overlooking the difficulty and that it takes to have the wherewithal and the skill to be able to understand such complex systems and make those correct choices. I mean, we can put whole committees of people together that are just going to sit around and never really know how to move correctly, and then they'll make a move that just seems like the most boneheaded thing ever. But I think, as much as it's really easy and fun to, and deserving a lot of time to rail on these people, that claim to be our elites, I think it really gets lost. And I'll give them this: these things aren't as simple as we like to approach them. And as we've increased with the interconnectivity of the world and the complexity of technology, we have increased the complexity of the world that we live in and of itself. And so
Right.
at the end of the day, make those conversations eye to eye, shake those hands, show up for people, make phone calls, even though no one wants to pick a phone up anymore, and be someone that's on the ground and with you and yours. And at least by being involved in that way, you can help others in the smallest to greatest ways. Sometimes just simply being able to share a drink and a handshake and a hug is enough to keep someone moving forward in a better direction and to keep their head in a good space, let alone, when everybody can get together. And if you don't like, the way the landscape is around you, then, at the very least, maybe you could all go out there on a day and pick up all the trash and clean up everything around there and make it look better, at least from one point.
That's beautiful, man. Where can people find your work?
JoshBarnett.com is one of the easiest places to find me. On Instagram and Twitter at Josh L. Barnett, although I sadly don't really wax on these sort of things other than on the occasional podcast, it seems like. Yeah, those are probably, I'm on Facebook, which is how we actually interacted.
Yeah.
Some parts of the world still actually use it.
Yeah.
And I will say, with what I think is such an awful GUI at this point, like the framework for the whole UX is
for
terrible.
Facebook?
I was screaming at the other day about putting a video up, and I'm like, okay, I want to edit this video. Oh, you gave me the option that I could choose a still but you won't show me any stills. That's a great, this platform works fantastic.
Yeah.
But you know what? The Messenger still works pretty well. And those pages, I mean, look, they allow you to upload what you want onto there. And I feel like we live in an age where information is just a fingertip away all the time. And we spend less time actually comprehending what it is that's in front of us. Like seeing sometimes how often I have to go, someone go, well, what time does the thing start? Did you read the goddamn flyer? Literally every bit of information is in there.
Yeah.
Nobody reads anything anymore. Anyways, Josh Barnett Official on Facebook. And I guess you'll be seeing me on the WillCast anyways.
Yeah, great. I get bullied so hard by my friends for being on Facebook, but hey, I got in touch with Josh Barnett, so it's not that bad.
It's a digital world, man. You got to be a digital man.
Exactly. This was great, Josh. Thank you so much.
Hey, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the podcast with Josh Barnett. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps out the podcast so much more than you know, and it is almost effortless for you to do, so might as well do it, Yeah, my favorite part about the subscribe button is the fact that it is risk-free. It is also just free. You can literally just press it. If you don't like what we put out here, you can unsubscribe again, but I bet you'll like it. All right. I try really hard to provide as much value as I possibly can in these episodes, along with these amazing guests that we have on here. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy. Peace.